When I was a kid, I loved playing chess. I was best at my age group in my local club, and I even kept up with most of the adults. I felt great. I felt like the king of chess. But then something changed. I graduated. I moved from my small hometown to a big city. Of course, I joined the local chess club. I still remember my first evening there. When I arrived, people were setting up a small tournament. I joined in. I played against every player there, and I lost almost every single game. I was devastated. How could this happen? In fact, this situation is quite common. Perhaps it's common to you. How many times have you heard the story of a person moving to a new town, joining a large tournament, or even just going to university and suddenly realizing that they aren't as good as they thought they were, that they aren't special? But why do these situations happen exactly? Can they always happen again? Can I just move somewhere else and all of a sudden I'm the worst at something I thought I was best? Are you ever going to be good enough? In this video, I want to try and answer this question. First, we need to zoom out. My hometown was quite small. In fact, it fits several times into my new city. Let's think about these 4 circles as 4 districts of the city. Let's look at one of those districts. How likely is it for one player to be better than half of the population? To talk about this question, we need to talk about the normal distribution. The normal distribution is a very important size in statistics, and it measures many things, for example body weight and height, but also stuff like IQ. For this video, you don't need to know anything about the normal distribution, but you do need to know what this curve means. So let's take a look at it. We don't actually care about the curve. We care about the area below the curve. You can think of this area as representing 100% of the population. The range of values that parts of this area covers is exactly the percentage of people in the population between this range. Let's take IQ scores as an example. This is a standardized IQ scale. You can see that almost all of the area, in fact about 99.7% of the area, covers the range from 70 to 130. So about 99.7% of the population has an IQ between 70 and 130. Similarly, the range between 80 and 120 is covered by about 95%, and the range between 90 and 110 is covered by 68% of the population. Anyway, so now that we talked about the normal distribution, let's go back to the original question. The probability that one player is worse than half of the population is given by this red area. It goes to the median. The median is the point for which exactly half of the population is worse and half of the population is better. You can easily see that for one player chosen at random, there's a 50-50 chance that he's worse than half of the population. But that's not what we care about. We care about the best player in a group. So let's look at this group. For every single one in this group, the probability that he's worse than half of the population is also 1/2. So, what is the probability for the best player in this group to be worse than half of the population? For that to happen, we need every single player in this group to be worse than half of the population, because otherwise the best player would not be that bad. So, the probability of the maximum score in a group to be smaller than this median is equal to 1/2 to the power of 4, which is equal to 0.0625, which is very small. But that's not all. In reality, we usually have much more than 4 people in a group. We have something like 10 or 20. You can see how we're pushing the boundaries here. It's extremely unlikely for the maximum out of a group to have a value that's worse than half of the population. Okay, so being the best player in the group is a big deal. It's extremely likely that you're better than at least half of your population. Nice, but what does this have to do with anything? Well, if you look at these districts, there's a best player for each district. So these players all probably go to a chess club. Perhaps they were here that night. But wait a second. All of these players were best players in their district. So if that's the only thing that we know about them, there's nothing in which they differ. So we can just go back and do the whole thing again. We can again plot the normal distribution and then calculate how the best player in this group behaves. Well, not exactly. This is where I was going, but if you think about it, the distribution of the best players of a group of 4 people is not very well described by a normal distribution. After all, we've just seen that the probability that for one of these players to be worse than the median is really small. It's almost 0. So we need another curve. And how do we get it? By the same method that we used before. We just multiply all of these kinds of areas below these curves to get a new curve. You can see that this curve has a much higher maximum value and that its center is shifted pretty far away. I want to go further. This was just level 1. This is one tournament for the best players of the district. But how about a regional tournament where the best players of each city join? So let's say 4 cities, 4 players. I just take the number 4 because it's a nice number. So we have 16 players. Alright, n equal to 16 because mathematicians love using n. So these 16 players are also in a completely different league than the 4 players that we were looking at. So again, we need to multiply all of these curves again. And let's just do the whole thing again. Let's say we have a national tournament. Each 4 cities in 4 states plays against each other. Then we have 256 people. So we have to multiply those areas below those curves again. You can see that it's pretty difficult to see the maximum of this curve. It's really high. Luckily, mathematicians have found a way of dealing with this problem. They just rescale it. Ah, that's much better. But what did just happen? Let's take a closer look. Let's start with the normal distribution. 1 player, so n is equal to 1. We have to measure our scores in something, so let's say we measure them in meters. Now, when we go to the case of the best player out of 4 people, we get this curve. You can see that it has a very high maximum value. This means that a lot of the values lie somewhere around this point. What's the solution? We measure with more precision. For example, with centimeters instead of meters. Makes sense. It takes more precision to see the difference in speed for this horse race than the difference in speed between these two cuties here. Let's just keep going now that we know that we can always normalize the curve when it jumps out of our screen. Let's see where this process goes when we look at the maximum of 16 people, 32, 64, and so on. This process approaches a Gumbel distribution. It is used to describe the distribution of a maximum of a group for a group with a very large population. You can use it, for example, to predict the likelihood of flooding for a large dam, an event which is very unlikely to occur, but has an extremely high cost if it occurs. In general, the area of statistics which deals with these kind of problems is called extreme value statistics. I encourage you to read up on this topic if you're interested, but it is not what I want to talk about today. Interesting is how we got to this process in the first place. No matter which scale we had, we constantly had to change our metric to keep up with the change in distribution of the maximum. So, no matter what metric we have, when you go to a place where there's a much larger population, you have to use a completely different one. This is crazy, but it's true. Look, for example, at these numbers. There are the top 100 men's senior scores in the 100-meter run. You recognize Usain Bolt as number 1, maybe, but look at the numbers below. First row is worldwide, second row is from Poland. Look at the number 100 player for the world. Look at the number 1 player in Poland. The score of the best player in Poland doesn't even show up in the best player worldwide. This doesn't have anything to do with Poland. I'm sure this holds up for the vast majority of countries, because the world is a very large place. So if we had a metric for the top 100 players in Poland, we couldn't even use this metric to analyze the top 100 players in the world. And this kind of makes sense. If I only compare myself to those people around me, there's no way I can talk about the performance of the people outside of this circle. It could be so much better, and most likely is. When I first dealt with this kind of experience, I was terrified. How can I be the best player in anything if there's always a best player in a city, in a state, in a country, or even in Europe that far outperforms me in any way. What's the point? Why am I even trying? The world is such a large place and I'm just such a tiny speck in it. Is there a point in any of this at all? Well, there might be. This is a difficult problem, and the answer that I'm going to give is very cheesy, but I truly believe that this is a very useful way to look at this. It is true that if you want to be the very best in the world, unless you're one of the very few, it's not going to happen. But this doesn't mean that your accomplishments have less value. It's true that you can take any score and you can find values which are too high for you to reach. But instead, you can look at your own score. I have been teaching a bit in the last years, and the things that I'm most happy about is not just when people are absolute geniuses, but also, and perhaps even more, when somebody just starts being so much better than what they used to be. So perhaps instead of looking at their performance in others, you can start looking at your own improvements and see if you're better than what you used to be. And if you are, isn't that great in of itself? Also, one thing that I have learned is that the fact that there are so many people who are much better than you is not necessarily a bad thing. If you move to a new town and go to some big tournament and you realize everybody is so much better than you, that's a really good way to improve. You have so much to learn from these people. And at least in my experience, people are happy to spend time with you, to share their knowledge. Perhaps you can learn from them, or even just play a game or two. Thanks for watching. This video is a submission for the Summer of Math Expositions 2. I would never have made it without this opportunity from the organizers. The last opinion stated in this video is just an opinion. If you want to add to it, disagree or agree, please let me know in the comments. I wish all of you the best.